Welcome to the Hop Edition podcast, brought to you in association with the Malt Miller, your go-to choice for premium homebrewing ingredients and equipment. Whether you're a beginner starting out or an experienced brewer, the Malt Miller has got you covered. So for top quality products and customer service, jump over to themaltmiller.co.uk and tell them the Hop Edition sent you. We would also like to thank all our Patreons for their continued support with running and developing the pod. If you would like to become a member and gain access to exclusive perks and benefits, head over to patreon.com/the Hop Edition. Now it's time to get this pod started, so crack open a homebrew and enjoy the episode. Hello everybody and welcome to episode 115 of the Hop Edition podcast. Tonight we're taking a deep dive into yeast health and all things fermentation related that will help you control what many consider, quite rightly so, to be the most important aspect of brewing. We have talked about yeast on a few episodes before. In fact, we did a fermentation specific episode very early on the Hop Edition podcast. I think it might have been the 9th episode, but given that we're 100 or 7th episode maybe, given that we're 100 plus episodes beyond that now, we thought it was time to revisit this one and kind of pull together our experience since then as brewers, and obviously bearing in mind that there's additional people on the podcast now as well from that point, and what we've learned from the various guests that we've had on the pod as well. So we've talked to people from Laumond and people from Omega and so on and so forth. And yeah, there's more to add to some of the stuff that we've already covered basically. So it was time to come back to yeast and talk about it again. Now, before we get into all of that, obviously a quick reminder to make sure that you do go and check out our wonderful sponsors, the Malt Miller, premier supplier of all things homebrew. And while you're over there, don't forget to check out their dedicated Hop Edition recipe section, where you can find a range of beers that are featured on the podcast, including some of our own creations, but also some recipes from our various guests along the episodes. So yeah, that's what we're doing tonight. And obviously we're going to have to start it off with the usual round robin of what are we drinking and how we're all doing generally. Has Owen recovered from his experience of Disney princesses this afternoon or evening?
Yeah, just about. To be fair, I think I slept through half of it.
That's probably for the best, mate, from what I've heard.
And then I had a pretty tasty wing stop, so it's been a pretty good evening, to be fair.
Oh, it's on the up then. The evening can only get better from here.
Yeah.
Are we including what we had for tea in this now then?
If you want to,
feel
yeah.
like we need to, yeah, why not?
We feel like we need to, okay. What are you drinking, by the way, Owen?
Oh, I'm drinking a Saison. So this is a Burning Sky recipe for one of their Saisons, the name of which escapes me right now. Saison Houblon. I'm not sure if you guys have drunk that commercially before.
It's a good Saison, is that one?
It's a really lovely Saison. I think it's kind of quite a easy drinking Saison. But the funny part was I forgot to dry hop the beer before I kegged it.
Wow.
Yeah, it happens.
So did you keg hop it, or have you just let it ride?
And then I've keg hopped it. But
Nice.
Unfortunately, the result is
Merc.
it's turned into a hazy boy. And I think it took me about 2 pints of beer to get 1 pint of beer. It's quite foamy.
You may be reading in the comments, Owen, that people are jealous of your hair. Actually, Tricky is massively jealous of your hair right now, and I'm going to show you
Very
exactly
much so.
why I don't give a fuck. Okay, I'll just show you this, because I literally don't have any right now.
Any hair at all. Bless
Yep.
you.
The issue is, when I was shaving my head on Friday morning, I had to clean the clippers, and they were jamming, so I took the head off and cleaned them, and then did my usual start clipping. Realised I'd totally forgot to put a guard on it, so Instead of going for my usual grade 0.5, I decided to go for grade 0. So, with what the weather's doing over the next few days, I imagine that's going to be quite beneficial.
Yeah, just try and not get it burnt, mate.
That's why I've got the
Keep
old
that-
Yakima
keep
Chief
that-
out on, mate.
Keep that hat on. And the hair today is because I have been wearing a hat pretty much all day.
So it's hat hair, is what you're
It's hat
telling
hair.
us.
It's a pretty
It's
strong,
still impressive.
Yeah, it looks
strong
like it's been
hat hair
unleashed.
vibe.
Yeah, Mark Collywell says that you look like a lion, Owen. Raw.
Raw.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's not do that again. So yeah, the saison. It's apparently the saison houblon recipe is very accurate to the commercial example. I just think keg hopping it's probably resulted in a slightly different outcome, but it is really drinkable and it's a really nice beer actually.
That's what you want, isn't it? Nice.
Yeah, it's, although I didn't use the exact yeast they recommended, I ended up using a WHC yeast, which was, can't remember the exact name of it. It might have been like their farmhouse yeast, maybe. I'm gonna struggle to remember. I'm gonna have to look it up.
Isn't that the one that we dubbed my first, or, what did you call it, Tricky? You called it Saison for Beginners or something, or My First Saison?
Something along
it's
those
called-
lines.
It
Yeah.
was Gnome from Imperial.
Oh, okay. This is called Farmhouse Vibes, which is a diastatic saison dry yeast.
Oh, okay.
I fermented it at the very bottom of the range, but it is pushing a lot more phenols than the yeast I think that they recommended in the recipe. So it's come out with a slightly stronger flavour as well. Probably not quite as drinkable as the commercial version. So there's a little bit of banana on there, a little bit of bubblegum.
Don't go
Little
too
bit-
far, mate. This is
little
what
bit
we're
of
talking
pepper.
about in the episode.
Yeah. So
Yeah, don't blow your wad
good.
early.
It's all relevant, but yeah, hold fire, hold fire.
that's what I'm drinking.
Calm
That's
down,
what I'm
buddy.
drinking.
Ease up, ease up. Yeah, I'm drinking CF312 Hazy, which has got slightly less hazy over the last week compared to how not hazy it was, last week.
Less than not hazy in the first place.
Yeah, I just can't make hazy beers, man. I don't know what's going off. Just can't do it. And for tea, I had 7-hour sous vide flank steak with homemade chimichurri wedges and sweet corn.
Sounds dirty.
It was
Yes.
dirty. The
Very
chimichurri
good.
was dirty. If anybody would like that chimichurri recipe that I use, I will happily share that one because I found it online and it's
Isn't
an
it just the
absolute
first
banger.
one that comes up when you Google it?
No, it isn't. It isn't. Weirdly
Sure.
enough,
Is it the Serious Eats one?
I can't. I'll have a look. You just
Cafe
crack on.
Delights or something like that, I think.
Is it the one that I've shared with you guys previously?
I'm sure that's the one you shared with me.
No, I'm
before.
sure you probably have shared it in the past, but I do like a bit of chimichurri on a steak.
It is Cafe Delights. Yes,
The Argentinians know what they're doing when it comes to it.
they have a lot of clue, don't they?
They do when it comes to cooking steak, for sure.
Yeah, it is an absolute banging chimichurri though. It's that one.
Yeah. I literally made a batch of that this evening.
Yeah.
I'll tell you more about it after I've talked about this beer.
Okay, I'll be
So,
quiet then.
This is my All Nelson Pale Ale. It's kind of a West Coast sort of style pale ale. I actually made this for the last Malt Miller competition, which was the Mysterious Brewing Comp. So the whole idea of that was kind of a single hop pale, following their sort of recipe for Citra Triangle, I think is the original one that it was based on. So it's been in the keg for quite a while, and it's really has conditioned and matured really nicely. It's tasting great. Yeah, loads of nice Nelson sort of vibes in this. Got a combination of normal sort of Nelson T90 and some of the Nelson CGX, I think they call it, which is the cryo Nelson basically.
That's the Crosby product, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's really, really good. Nice bit of bitterness in there. So it's got that kind of slightly more old school kind of West Coast kind of flavour profile to it. But come out really nicely. There was a point where I didn't really enjoy Nelson as much as a single hop on its own, but I feel like these days it's for whatever reason I seem to enjoy it more. So yeah, that is the beer, and for my dinner this evening, I also had a chimichurri based meal, but mine was with chicken thighs. So I saw a YouTube video of I think it was Meat Church Barbecue on YouTube, which is a really good channel. If you don't follow that one, for all the barbecue fans out there, and the guy on there was doing chicken thighs marinated in chimichurri and then slathered in chimichurri after going on the grill. So I was like, yeah, that's got to be done. Gave it a go, and they were fantastic. To be fair, I'd highly recommend you give that a go. I think chimichurri just works with pretty much anything, to be fair, but
It works flawlessly with pork loin chops. I'll just say that one.
So yeah, tell you what, for those of you on the YouTube, there you go. That was dinner.
Oh, you dirty, dirty man! Love it.
It was decent. So yeah, give that a go at some point.
Was that an actual photo?
That was an actual photo.
Well, nice.
I'm not being funny, guys.
Do you photograph all your meals?
The barbecue meals where I feel like I have to send them off to people in various messenger chats just to brag. Yes.
Just food porn.
I'm not quite at the point where I'm Instagramming every meal though, like some people do. But,
Yeah, don't do that shit.
Yeah, it's a bit much.
Yeah, the food thing. I think based on a conversation that I'm currently having with somebody from, what do you call them? It'll come to me in a minute. Brewer Select. Okay, I'm having a conversation with somebody from Brewer Select at the moment. Crazy guy from Atlanta, Georgia. Well, he's not from Atlanta, he's from Savannah. And he's one of their sort of top dudes. And he's probably going to come on and do a podcast with us purely about barbecue. And just drink some beer and, talk about stuff that they do. But predominantly it will be barbecue and barbecue recipes. So I'm trying to organise a date with him at the minute. He's such a wild dude. Massive, great big Zapatash as well, which is just epic.
Nice.
So, yeah, we'll see where that one goes.
Right. So shall we crack on with the
let's talk about
for
yeast
today?
Let's get into it.
So yeah, we're looking at sort of fermentation, yeast health, and everything that kind of is related to that, including what yeast kind of contributes to beer and different flavor compounds and all the rest of it. But we kind of need to start it off by sort of talking about why is yeast health important, and we're going to talk about that in terms of the things that you're either looking to avoid or the things that you're looking to enhance in terms of the way that the yeast performs. So we're going to get into all of those different things in more detail as we go through. But I think probably a good place to start is to go back to the old adage that brewers make wort and yeast makes beer, really. So that's, kind of what we've got to kind of factor in here. And I think it's something that I'm sure we've all sort of heard that kind of terminology fairly early on, but the more that I've brewed, the more that I've realized that, the real truth behind that and how it is probably the thing that is most important for me in terms of like making sure that I get, a good result with the beers that I'm brewing generally is paying more attention to the yeast. And I'd say it's probably the thing that has, improved, not necessarily the quality of the beers like batch to batch, but certainly the consistency of my brewing, I would say is much better when I've been consistently approaching what I'm doing with the yeast and trying to make sure that that's healthy. So yeah, don't know what your thoughts are on that, guys, but
I'll agree with you completely on that one, Trick. There's been a few beers that I've made where I've been, let's say, lax with my yeast, not really treated them very well, and I have found that those beers have suffered because of that. And I've also done a few beers recently where I've really looked after the yeast, made sure that they're pitched at the temperature, taking them in slowly, adequate sort of splashing, let's say, when they've gone into the fermenter.
Yep.
And I've started, I know that, I mean, it's a tiny little thing, but one of the things that I have found that's kind of, it's aided the kickoff time of the yeast is I add the yeast as I'm transferring into the fermenter. Rather than just pitching onto the top.
Yeah.
Just fucking get them in. Do you know what I mean? Get them in.
That's actually a really good point. I don't think we put that into the notes because it's probably something that's just kind of come to mind for you right now. But yeah, I've noticed exactly the same thing, and especially when, like, if you're transferring a beer in and you get that massive, like, frothy, foamy head on the top of it, and then you sprinkle the yeast on the top of that, and then it probably just sits there on top and doesn't really, you know, sort of absorb in or soak up the wort that quickly. And
also,
you're almost adding lag time to the lag time by just having it not going into the wort for.
It's not even that.
While.
If they're sitting on the foam, they're going to rehydrate.
Yeah.
And they're not going to have sufficient food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you may end up with some of them starting to bud and starting to die. And you can actually end up with increased lag time, but also reduced cell count because of that, which is mainly why I can't remember who I was talking to. I was talking to somebody, and I said, "Oh yeah, and I need to get my yeast out." And I was already transferring into the fermenter, and they went, "Why are you waiting till now? Get them in." And I thought, do you know what? That makes absolute sense. Get them in, get them completely soaked, get them into the liquid part of the transfer, and just see what happens. And you can count it in hours, the difference between kickoff time and...
I think it's measurable doing that.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Like...
Yeah, just something that I thought about off the top of my head. Sorry for interrupting, Trick.
Yeah, great
No,
tip.
not at all. That's actually a really good tip, and I
Yeah.
fully agree. I try and do that as much as I can. I quite often forget and end up still putting it on the top, but then generally I'll try and give the fermenter a bit of a, you know, shake about to try and get it to start sinking in. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the question is, what can we do to ensure a healthy fermentation? Well, there's your first tip that you've just had. Get your yeast in while you're transferring your beer in. That's going to make a difference. It's also going to ensure that it's properly mixed throughout the wort. You know, because even if you're using a liquid pitch, you're still going to ensure that it's completely mixed. It's not just sitting in the top layer, because we know that you get stratification when it comes to the different sugar concentrations throughout, and you don't want that. So yeah, get them in. But also, and Tricky is an absolute stickler for this, and I know Owen is as well. Reiki had to use the word edging, didn't he? He had to. It's always Reiki. Oh man. No, but I agree with that as well. You can pitch a couple of degrees below and let your fermentation fridge recorrect for that. Yeah, that's a good one. But also,
you finish your point, Chris, and I want to pick something up from what Reiki said, or a question.
Yeah.
well, now's a good place before I move on to the next bit, mate. You crack on.
I just felt like you were mid-point when you started reading.
Yeah, sorry,
I kind of was, but I was
there.
gonna jump into yeast vitality and talk about Tricky, and you especially, with the making of starters and the slight overbuild to take into account the death and all that sort of stuff that we've started doing with the liquid yeast, just as a matter of course. But yeah, that's fine. Crack on, do your bit.
Put a pin in that. We'll come back to it, Chris. Reiki made a really interesting point there in terms of sort of taking your wort down to a slightly lower temperature than the intended fermentation temperature. And Chris said, you know, you let your fridge heater take care of that. What about in the other direction? Sometimes, particularly summer brewing, it takes a long time to get your wort down those last few degrees. I've had some experience of pitching warmer and then letting the fridge bring the temperature down. Do you think it works in both directions? Do you think one is better than the other?
I think lower versus higher is better, personally. So what I will do in those situations is I will just transfer in, and then I'll put it into the fermentation fridge and set the temperature a couple of degrees below where I want it to be, allow it to chill for 4 or 5 hours, whatever, then come back, then repitch. But I tend not to do that if I'm using dry yeast. because of the situation that we talked about originally with the sitting on the foam. Oh,
Yeah.
something's broken.
Because
Oh.
I've tended to find that if you do pitch, say like you're making a lager and you're intending to ferment at 12 degrees and you can only get it down to about 16 and you're not willing to wait around for another 3 hours to get down to 12 degrees, or in the case of the summer, you may not ever get it down to 12 degrees.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, when you groundwater is sort of like, yeah, might be sort of 16, 17 degrees. You're never going to get close to that pitching temp straight away. It's, you know, I think this is some of this stuff you've got to see it as like in an ideal world, like that's the way that you want to do it. And sometimes it's like, well, I'd rather get the yeast in now than wait however many hours to pitch and give other stuff a chance to get going in there, maybe. So you know, you've got to sort of treat each situation by its merits, I guess. So
yeah.
Adaptability and flexibility is important when it comes to brewing, especially summer brewing.
yeah,
Yeah.
my preference is to try and get it in a little bit cooler as well, if possible. But
Yeah.
quite often, again, like you say, in summer brewing lagers, it just doesn't happen like that way. It's
No.
not.
Yeah.
That's why we use Voss, boys. That's why we use Voss.
Some would say, should we be brewing lagers in the summer? Should have done that already, shouldn't we? Should have done it in the
Tricky's
spring.
twitching.
Ready for the summer.
You said the V word.
When I have pitched warmer and then brought it down, what I've tended to find again is the lag time tends to be shorter.
Yeah.
But I don't know what kind of impact that then sort of has on the potential fermentation. It's kind of really warm and then it's sort of slowing the yeast down a little bit, or maybe it's sort of in temp range anyway. Does it just contribute to the budding phase?
I mean, I don't know.
It's
That's a question, isn't it?
It's so short that is it going to really start to chuck any fermentation off flavours? Probably not. I think it probably depends on how big that temperature delta is that you're trying to drop from one down to the
Absolutely.
other.
Yeah.
You can't pitch it at 22 and then get it down to 12 and probably expect a good result. But
No.
yeah, okay.
I would say definitely not on that one.
Good
Yeah.
tangent. Good
So
tangent.
Yeah.
should we skip back to yeast vitality
Yes, let's do
generally? And I think again, this is probably one of the points that all of us, I think, are much more aware of than probably when we started, when it was like, oh, just chuck a pack of yeast in and off you go, and it'll probably be all right. Now, dry yeast obviously is a little bit, you know, a little bit easier to work with in this sense, because generally, as long as you've kept it cool and it's not wildly out of date, you're going to get a fairly, you know, reliable amount of yeast cells out of dry yeast packets. That said, you know, if it is nearing the end of its sort of best before date or whatever, there will still be some drop off in yeast vitality, and you may want to consider, you know, putting that onto one of the yeast calculators and seeing how much it may have dropped by, and possibly considering dropping in an extra packet. When we talk about liquid yeast, this becomes much more of a concern, and you know, I think we did talk about this on that first episode way back when me and Chris were talking about it, and it
Your
was kind
pet
of,
peeve, Tricky. Your
it was
pet peeve.
yeah, it was kind of also based off of the back of a video that I did related to this, where I sort of laid out the numbers basically in terms of what your ideal pitching rate is versus what you actually get out of a typical packet of liquid yeast, and how much that can have dropped off if that yeast is a few months old, and so on and so forth. So, you know, basically what it comes down to is that, you know, under ideal conditions, even if you've got that yeast packet, and we're talking about liquid yeast here specifically, literally fresh from the yeast supplier, and there's been no loss whatsoever, 100% vitality. Some of the companies, so I think Y Yeast, I'm not 100% sure whether the new version of the White Labs is the same, but they used to be. Some of those packets will have 100 billion cells in them, which is okay for ale fermentation, generally speaking, but it may still be a little bit under the ideal pitch rate. A lot of these things are marketed, by the way, as pitchable quantities. So they'll say you can direct pitch this into your beer and it will be fine. And the thing that really did annoy me with that is it didn't seem to change that information regardless of whether it was a lager yeast or an ale yeast. But anyway, we'll come back to that in a minute. Now, the thing you then have to factor in is obviously if it's a few months old, the vitality starts to drop off very quickly. And the great thing about things like Brewfather and yeast calculators you can find online generally, it's not it's not exclusive to Brewfather. You can find that in other brewing software as well, and also in sort of dedicated yeast calculators online, is that you can put in the dates that things are manufactured and find out an estimated vitality for the yeast. But let's say you're getting a packet of Y yeast and you've got 100 billion cells in there, and that's now dropped to 50% vitality. If you're doing let's say a sort of average 5% ale fermentation, and the pitch rate is maybe going to be somewhere, ideal pitch rate or target pitch is going to be somewhere around 200 billion cells, you may be doing like a 25% of ideal pitch there for the yeast. If we think about it in terms of a lager, then even if you've got 100% vitality, a standard kind of 5% lager yeast, standard sort of 5% lager batch, the ideal pitch rate is probably going to be around about 400 billion cells. So in that case, even with 100% vitality, you're looking at 25% of what you would ideally have with one packet of liquid yeast that's 100 billion cells. With something that's a few months old, you might be even less than that. So you might be getting down to sort of 1/10 of what you would ideally be pitching within a few months. So obviously that's the point where starters and things come into their own, and why, for me personally, I think you should absolutely always make a starter with liquid yeast, regardless of how fresh the packet is. Now, little caveat to that, some other manufacturers like Imperial will have packs which are essentially double the size, so you've got 200 billion cells in those. I'm relatively confident with them to pitch directly into an ale if it's really fresh. If I know that packet is sort of like 1 month, maybe 2 months out from manufacture, and it's been sent to me by somebody like the malt miller, who will cold pack it and send it out and make sure that it's been stored and transported really well. But even with Imperial, if it's a lager especially, I'm making a start with that every single time, because I want to check the vitality of it. Sometimes even the age on there, based on the manufacturing date or whatever, it may have not been treated particularly well in transport, all the rest of it. You don't know what's happened to it between it getting to you, and then sometimes you'll put it into a starter and it may just not get going, or it might take a long time to get going. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I've waffled on about that quite a bit, but I don't know if you guys are feeling the same way about sort of liquid yeast generally nowadays. Get yourself a stir plate. Yeah,
go to the malt miller, buy one of these. They are amazing. I have never, and remember, I'm a scientist, I have not used a stir plate that is quite as ferocious,
vigorous
as one of these.
Does it whip that wort?
It whips that wort, son. These, I don't like promoting Kedlang products. I don't. This is amazing. This is probably, I'll tell you how good this is. I bought 3 of these for use at work. We've got some big ones that are heated that work really well for some of the stuff I make, but they don't spin fast enough. This spins fast enough. These are really, really good. Get one of these and get a 3-litre flask to go with it. Just, Reiki's on now. Just tell him that you're going to get, just make sure he sends it out on Monday. They're brilliant. They're really, really good.
And just to bring in a point that Reiki's put into the chat, talking about extra packs of dry yeast. And again, he's talking about getting to final gravity sooner rather than later. But I think just on the general theme of like looking to get a good pitch of yeast in there and making sure you hit the sort of amount that you want. Again, even with dry yeast, a single packet, most of the time you're going to be fine. But bear in mind, you're probably still, in a lot of cases, a little bit underneath the ideal pitch rate. And nowadays, I really have myself come round to the point where it's like, look, do I really want to sort of like worry about an extra 3 or 4 quid's worth of yeast going in, or do I want to guarantee that that fermentation is going to go like off as soon as possible, and it's going to be a really healthy pitch of yeast, and it's going to get going and get chewing into that, you know, wort as soon as possible. For me, I'd rather spend the extra £3, £4, and chuck an extra packet in. So I don't know about you guys.
I would rather spend the money and have good fermentation. You're muted, Owen.
I said likewise, yeah, and I think you know, I tend to rely on Brewfather to provide
Yeah,
some yeast calculations, and it tends to give you, for dry yeast, the exact amount of grams that you need. Obviously, most dry yeast packs come in 11 grams.
yep,
So if it comes in at like 15, 16 grams, I tend to just pitch 2 packs anyway.
yeah. I mean, I'm looking at a sort of 5.6% hazy recipe that I did recently, and it's saying 246 billion or 24 grams of dry yeast. So, yeah, 2 packs basically.
And what, you know, actually, technically that would be an underpitch, right? So you're pitching in 22 grams versus your 24. What's your kind of tolerance here, guys, do you think?
I think that depends entirely on what beer you're brewing.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
underpitching can give different flavour contributions. That little bit of stress on the yeast can change the beer almost dramatically. I mean, it can change it dramatically with wheat beers. But specifically, it would depend on what it is that I'm brewing and how much yeast character I want in it.
Yeah. So some beer styles actually recommend that you underpitch, right? For
Absolutely.
instance, Hefeweizens, I think, benefit from stressing the yeast out slightly. I think Fike's a classic example
Oh my God.
of a massive underpitch. That's
Yeah.
a slightly different kettle of fish, though, to be fair.
Yeah, that's different ball game.
Different ball game entirely. But
Different sport, that one, yeah.
and I think actually for your kind of hazy beers as well, I think, but your tolerance there is probably what, sort of max 20%.
I'm not even sure I'd go as far as 20, to be fair.
I think for a Hefeweizen you might.
Oh no,
hazy,
Hefes I've pitched 50%
50%.
in Hefes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean,
yeah.
you stress the crap out of those yeasts.
So your hazies, you're probably going to be talking about 10% then, maybe.
Yeah, around about that, yeah.
Yeah.
Lagers, I wouldn't underpitch at all.
I'd be chic to probably overpitch. If
Yeah,
anything.
totally, yeah. Yeah, maybe 20% overpitch with a lager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you what does benefit weirdly from underpitching is any kind of stout that you're making with fruity hops. They weirdly benefit from, I mean, I think the biggest underpitch I've ever done on a stout that I've hopped with something fruity, I've got a Centennial stout that I make. And I think the biggest I've ever gone is 30% underpitch on that. And that worked out really well. I got some lovely fruity flavours off that bad boy. It was nice.
And I think actually, if you're underpitching but you're pitching really healthy yeast,
Totally.
then you can.
Yeah,
There's differences here, isn't it? It's like you're kind of almost talking about, well, what's the amount that you're pitching in, but there's no room for mistakes when it comes to pitching healthy yeast.
No, I think that's a good point, and it highlights actually another take on this where people will sort of say, well, it's more about doing a vitality starter, where it's like make sure you're pitching active yeast in rather than worrying about the exact cell count and stuff. And you know, I know that there's very experienced and well-known sort of home brewing people that recommend those kind of methods. I still kind of like feel like I've personally got better results just by pretty much overbuilding starters and going for the bigger numbers basically as far as the pitch. But equally, even doing that, I have noticed that if I sort of don't worry about, adding in most of the starter with the yeast, and I pitch it while it's actually still actively fermenting, you do see a noticeable difference there in terms of how quickly it gets going and stuff. And
Oh, big time, yeah.
I've done that recently with a lager, and which brings me on to another point. Sort of one of the things with lager starters that people sort of worry about is having to get like massive flasks and stuff so that you can do 5
Step
litre
that
starters
shit.
and that. Stepped starters. If you've got a 3 litre flask or even a 2 litre flask, you can do stepped starters with lager yeast. And yeah, it's going to take you a little bit longer to do it because you've got to basically build it up, obviously. So going to take you a bit longer. You have to plan a bit further ahead. But recently, I've realised that one of the advantages of doing that is I can do a sort of 2 litre starter, and on the second step, when I've built it up, while it's still actively fermenting, just pitch the whole thing in, and it's going to go off. For especially by lager standards, very rapidly, and start that fermentation up with very little lag phase by the normal standards you'd expect when you're doing kind of lager brewing. Just something that I've noticed anyway. So yeah, that would be another sort of
totally.
general tip for me would be with those, do the stepped starter so that you actually have the option to chuck the whole lot in, rather than like 2 litres of a 23 litre batch is a lot less concerning to me than 5 litres into where it's nearly and also just the volume of it in terms of making your numbers go a bit off the chart from where you're expecting them to be, and so on. So yeah, what's that, Chris? I think that the lager chat has made him throw a
Of course it is.
Paulaner.
Doesn't take much
Paulaner,
for Chris to pull out a lager from the fridge, does it?
It just has to be a day with a Y in it.
A day with a Y in it, yeah. Interestingly, I just leaving us back for a bit, Trick, you were talking about liquid yeast packs and their general yeast count. I don't know if you guys have tried or used WLP's new Pure Pitch yeast. And
I've used a couple of them, yeah.
I'm not exactly sure, and I think there's some kind of proprietary technology that they're using in there. But interestingly, when you go on Brewfather and you add a yeast and you calculate the yeast, there's an option to click Pure Pitch, and it's interesting just how much difference that makes to the required sort of start sizes and yeast cell numbers. So there seems to be something going on there. The challenge is you go onto the WLP website and it doesn't tell you the amount of
they're not going to give it away,
cells
are they?
in the pack. All they do is they tell you that they're designed to pitch at a 0.75 million cells per milliliter of wort in a 5-gallon batch.
Yeah.
So they're just saying that amount of yeast in our pouch is designed to pitch into a standard ale pitch rate.
But
Which
what
is a
they're
bit of a
not,
weird statement to make, right? Because like,
but they're not telling you how old it is.
oh, well, I mean the viability seems to. That's another point actually with the Pure Pitch is the viability curve is significantly different to what you'd expect to see when you go and check, like calculate the viability, right? For instance, I've just plugged something in. If I put the manufacturing date back to say the 1st of January this year, right? What would you expect the viability of a pack of liquid yeast that's manufactured on the 1st of January be?
40% maybe.
Chris, you're on
Chris, you're
mute.
muted.
70?
86%.
Wow.
Compared to, if it's not Pure Pitch, 17%.
Wow.
Well, that was even lower than what I thought was lowballing.
I think that pretty much
So-
just says make a starter with everything, though, doesn't it? I mean, let's cut to the chase on this one.
Yeah.
Make a starter with everything, boys. You know, unless you're looking for that yeast character, just make a starter with everything. Just do it.
Yeah, but equally, it's like, I think my point was check out this sort of Pure Pitch
Oh, no, totally. But how much are they a pack?
thing. They are a little bit more expensive. I don't know, I think they're maybe about 11 or 12 quid.
The dried yeast is £10.50, mate.
Yeah, they are. They're pretty expensive, aren't they?
Glad I nicked a load for free from Beer X.
Yeah, I think Pure Pitch is about 14 quid. But equally, is the benefit there is it can sit in your fridge for quite a bit longer
Oh, totally.
without that anxiety that you get about, God, I need to use that yeast, or when am I gonna do that yeast starter?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't know. Maybe we need somebody from White Labs to come on and tell us all about Pure Pitch.
That would be good.
Be good.
Would definitely be good.
Yeah, that'd be useful, wouldn't it?
It
If
would
anybody
be.
from White Labs listen to this, send me an email. thehopedition@gmail.com.
I reckon Reiki might be able to hook us up.
I'm hoping he can. Reiki, can you hook us up?
Hook us up, big boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that the liquid yeast, and this is definitely something that I talked about on the video that I previously did, and probably on the last podcast as well. But I feel like the liquid yeast manufacturers, or some of them anyway, do themselves a bit of a disservice with this whole sort of approach to saying that, oh, this is an ideal quantity to put into a fermentation. Because I know from personal experience that when I started using liquid yeast, I tried, throwing packets straight into beers several times and had some pretty lackluster results from that, because you'd have beers that just didn't do anything for a week or more in some cases, and a few of them got infected as a result, I think, because they were just taking so long to get going. And I was like, well, what have I done wrong? I thought this was like this amazing liquid yeast that's supposed to kick off. And you see it all the time on forums and on Facebook groups and whatever, that people are sort of talking down about liquid yeast quite a lot, because they kind of go, well, I tried it and it was rubbish compared to the dry yeast. And it's like, well, yeah, because they should tell you to make a starter as a sort of matter of course, really. But obviously that's not probably something they think is particularly good marketing wise. But I just feel like they're probably putting more people off through bad experience than they are, do you know what I mean, encouraging with the idea that you can just use it as it is out the packet. Not to say that it's impossible to use them out the packet. Like I said, sometimes if they are in peak condition, especially with the bigger sized yeast packets, then yeah, you can do that. But generally speaking, as we've just said, make a starter. Like why wouldn't you give that advice to make the best use of the product? I don't really understand.
And it's interesting that we really simplify this pitch rate piece, particularly when you have a look on Brewfather or most calculators, where it goes an ale up to 1060 OG, you can pitch 0.75 million cells per milliliter, and it's like, well, that's a bit oversimplified, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a wild range of potential scenarios, isn't it?
You could be brewing a beer from anywhere between sort of 1030 through to 1060, couldn't you? And clearly your 1030 pitch rate is going to be very different to your 1060 pitch rate. So if you don't have a yeast starter kit, because it's a bit of a barrier, we don't fancy doing that, my recommendation would be make a smaller beer, try and get that fresh packed liquid yeast, pitch that in. You're far more likely to get a good result. And then if you do want to then make that 1060 beer or whatever, then make the beer and pitch it onto the yeast cake.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
So you're using a beer as a starter?
Yeah, effectively, right? Yeah, it's just.
Why wouldn't you do that? As long as you're not dry hopping, it's not an issue.
Yeah. That's the challenge.
Oh, wait there.
A lot of beer styles are dry hop these days, right?
Thomas wants to know about starter sizes when making steps for growing cell counts.
Put us on the spot there. Come on.
Okay. I do happen to have anecdotal evidence on this one. So if I'm growing from a slant, I will start off with 400 mils of 1039 wort. Okay? After that will go straight into 2 litres of 1039 wort. And then if I'm going for a lager, I will then decant off the supernatant and I will resuspend the yeast at the bottom in 3 litres of 1039 wort, and I will then pitch just before it finishes fermentation. Tricky said this earlier, but if you do the numbers on that one, what you actually end up with is about, I think I've worked it out as 550 billion cells from your average slant.
Yeah.
Now, if you're
that sounds
working,
about right.
if you're working from a pack of liquid yeast, generally you can pitch that straight, as long as it's not too old, as long as it's above about 30% vitality, you can pitch that straight into 2 litres of 1039, decant off and do another 2 litres of 1039 and go from there, and that will get you to, depending on what your start was, somewhere around about 400 bill. And what that then allows you to do is only pitch part of it, rebuild, stick it in a jar, put it in your fridge. And it's like having a super massive pack of liquid yeast in your fridge ready to go for your next beer. Also, we talked about this on the last podcast. If you do pitch all of your starter, you have not pitched all of your yeast. Add some more wort directly to that flask without rinsing it out, stick it back on your stir plate, and within 3 days you will have another pitch ready to go of that yeast. We talked about this before. Save money, do it that way. But from slant up to pitching a lager, that's what I would do. If you're pitching it into an ale, generally I will go direct from the slant into 400, and from 400 in. Is it not good practice to match your beer's expected OG? No, because you want to keep the yeast within the budding phase as much as possible in order to grow your cell count. That's why I use 1039. And I only use 1039 because 1038 is a pain in the ass to weigh out the DME for. So I use 1039 because it's a round number. But yeah, if I'm going
That
for,
just works out to about like 100 grams per litre, basically, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So
essentially, yeah.
it's easy to figure that one out.
Yeah, you can work the maths is simpler.
Of DME, that is. God, sorry.
Yeah, if you're using LME, don't even ask me. I don't use it. But yeah, if I'm growing up for different beers, then I will note what the final cell count I want is. So if it's a Hefe, it'll be lower. If it's a lager, it'll be higher. If it's an ale, depending on the gravity, I'll tweak it to that. And essentially just kind of work it out as to what I want. And I always overbuild slightly, knowing full well that some of those yeast are going to still be in that flask. So, yeah.
Yeah. If we're looking at a sort of a packet of typical liquid yeast as a starting point with that, generally speaking, if it's really fresh, so we're talking sort of, up towards sort of 80-90% vitality, then for a 2-step starter to get you up to sort of a lager pitch, so if we're talking about 400 billion cells, then probably a couple of like 1.5 litre ish sort of starters are going to get you pretty close to that. If the packet is a little bit less vital, or it's a couple of months older, generally you just see the sort of volume of those go up a little bit, so it will be more like 2 litres per step, or 2 and a bit litres, and so on. But as I said, generally speaking, you can do it within a 3 litre flask quite easily, whichever one of those there are. But I would tend to, if I didn't have the calculator there, if I was doing it for an ale yeast, I'd generally just do a 1.5 litre starter, sort of as a default, and for lagers I'd do 2 of those essentially. So that would be my sort of go-to option.
Yeah, that gets you direct to your pitch rate.
Yeah,
it's a good one. Yeah, the maths is quite interesting on yeast pitch rates. We won't go into it now, but do a bit of research on it. It's really quite, well, if you're into maths, it's really quite interesting. Yeah. Do you not think, and I'm going to say this, it's probably going to be a contentious thing, but do you not think that liquid yeast manufacturers, by shipping the yeast as they do and assuming that you're going to buy them when they're not at their most vital, are simply pimping for you to buy more than one pack?
I'm not sure that's their intention.
I don't know, because the pricing of it almost sort of, yeah.
It's a fresh product, isn't it? It's yeah. I think what we've probably seen over the last 3 or 4 years is dry yeast really beginning to probably dominate the market, right? I think the only time you're really using liquid yeast is if you're looking for something very specialist, right? Like a Mexican lager yeast or a specific German brewery yeast or something like that, or some strange like mixed firm. Yeah. Anyway, most of the time, I think the dry yeast range you can now get is going to cover 80% of beer styles. I think there's a lot you can't brew with dry yeast these days, which is great.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got to cover one point that Thomas has just brought up. He bought a 5-litre flask shortly after trying to make a Kvike starter. One thing I will tell you about making multi-step starters is ensure headspace. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody needs to go out and buy a 5-litre flask. If you have one, use it. You can get away with a demijohn if you've got a strong enough stir plate, okay? But the reality is, that second stage is going to go off like a goddamn rocket, and you are going to end up with a Krausen like you've never seen before, because it's in an Erlenmeyer, so it's pointy, right? There's not that much headspace, and you can get quite serious overflow issues.
Eruptions.
That's the phrase, yes.
I've come down to the kitchen to find one heck of a mess on a few occasions. It also, I would note, is very dependent if it's what the ambient temperature is in wherever you've got your starter, right?
It does,
If you're making one in the summer, it tends to be a lot more lively, shall we say.
I know people who put them in their fermentation fridge at the right temperature. I'm not entirely sure you need to do that, to be fair.
I don't. I can see why people would.
I'm not going to do that with. What's going off with your lights, Tricky?
I know, it's doing my head in.
Out, man.
I've been, I went over to try and fiddle
You're
with
in a disco,
light switch,
bro.
But the fucking, the lights just keep flicking on and off. Sorry about that.
It's probably a demon.
It must be. That's the obvious
explanation. It's the only plausible explanation. That or aliens.
They're possessed.
Yeah. Thomas said he would call it fountain-like, but we've just had a very large compliment, guys. Warm Hug Fermentation says, everything that I just said about slants and overbuilding is pretty new to me, so many thanks. You are more than welcome, mate. Enjoy.
Welcome. A whole interesting, fun part of homebrewing to get into, I think, actually.
It's great fun.
So, have fun exploring that. I'm
Definitely.
sure Tricky's got about 45 videos to watch on
More than
those
45,
various
surely.
subjects. So what about nutrients, guys, or nutrition for yeast? Do you tend to use any form of additional nutrients in either in your beer or in your yeast?
I thought you were going to say in my everyday life. I'm not listing all my supplements.
Don't do that.
One thing that I would recommend is, and I'm gonna say it because I found it to be amazing. NBS, like the malt miller's own brand yeast nutrient, is just amazing, right? I know we're sponsored by them, and I know it sounds like I'm kissing ass, but I'm not. It's really well priced. It's really easy to use, and it's really, really good. And for me, that's the simple thing. Is it cheap enough that it's not prohibitive? Does it do the goddamn job it's supposed to? And if the answer to both of those is yes, then I'm buying it. It's as simple as that. It's really, really good. Just make sure you chuck it in your boil with about 10 minutes to go.
Yeah.
It just works really, really well.
I tend to use yeast nutrient in pretty much every beer. How much do you tend to put in, out of interest?
whatever the recommended pitch rate is.
Okay, so yours varies dependent on the amount of yeast you're putting in.
No, it's literally written on the packet.
Ah.
Yeah.
So you weigh out.
I don't know if I weigh it out. I might measure it out with a. Hang on, I'll have a look.
Because I tend to just have a little sprinkle. I'm more on the artistry side than the science side.
I've got to go full disclosure on this one. I don't generally use additional yeast nutrients when I'm brewing.
Interesting.
I have got some of the generic
There you go.
yeast nutrient that I think was bought from not the malt miller, somewhere else. And yeah, I've used it a couple of times, didn't really notice much of a difference, and just didn't really sort of bother doing it again afterwards, to be honest. I have seen the malt miller have got the I can't remember what it's called, but was that what you just
White
held
Labs.
up? No, I think they've got one where it's like a combination of finings and nutrients, so you can kind of like do both at the same time.
No, I just use this one, the MBS yeast nutrient. I bought like 4 packs of this, and this is my second to last pack.
Right.
You know, it says best before 2012. No, it's fine. So yeah, I just use that, but I also have obviously MBS Clarity as well to reduce my my gluten level, so my friends can drink it. Because I've got some friends who are a little bit gluten intolerant. But yeah, absolutely use that stuff. It's amazing. It's really, really good.
It's actually what is in yeast nutrient.
All sorts of stuff.
I think the generic one that I did use a couple of times was that Brett's just posted.
Diammonium phosphate.
Has it got diamonds in it?
No, it's got diammoniums in it.
Ah, that sounds less interesting.
Essentially, it's a phosphate group with 2 ammonium, so it's ammonium phosphate times 2. But it's really useful. Yeah, and also, as Liam said, a lot of it is just dead cells.
Yeah.
Because it contains everything that the yeast need. It's just nicking it off their mates. And Warm Hug, use it every brew. It is cheap additional insurance. Absolutely, it really is. You know.
No, and I as much as I've just said like, oh, I don't use it as a belt and braces approach, I wouldn't. I also wouldn't say don't use it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, why wouldn't you? It doesn't. You know, it might very small additional cost, but yeah.
I also find it takes off faster. I find that there is a measurable difference between kick-off time between adding it and not adding it. And you know, we all like a good quick kick-off, don't we?
We do.
Let's be fair.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Let's be honest. I'm going to say this one quietly, right? But everybody likes to sniff the spunding valve, don't they? Everybody does. We all do. We all sniff it. Why not get it going faster so you can sniff more from the spunding valve? That's all I'm saying.
This is turning into like the
Went a bit
confessions of a
ASMR
homebrewer.
there, didn't it? That was a bit weird.
I'm gonna just talk into the microphone.
Sniff that spot.
Owen, stop doing that. You're going to turn people on with your hair. Give up.
Oh dear, it's gone downhill already. So we kind of split on yeast nutrient use.
Just
sorry.
add it. Just add it.
I did see WHC do a yeast nutrient as well. I don't know if you can pick that up in the 3 for 2, the malt miller.
Hold on. There's a 3 for 2 on yeast.
Well, there was over Easter.
I think it might still be on. I might be
If
wrong.
it's still on, I'm on it. Like a freaking car bonnet.
So I don't know if the yeast nutrients is included in that offer or not. If Reiki's on the chat, I'm sure he'll tell me. But
I think Reiki's fucked off. I'm not even sure Reiki's there anymore.
I think he has.
He's not said anything for a while, so you might be right.
There's still a 3 for 2. I think you can get the yeast nutrient.
All right, be back in a bit, boys.
Yeah, you can. So it's called Hyperdrive. It's a 22 gram pack. Let's have a look. No, I'm talking total bollocks because that is a yeast for making salsa and vodka.
It's got
So
nutrient in it,
it's got
but yeah,
nutrient
it's not.
in
It's
it.
not quite the same
Oh,
thing.
my bad. So I just misread that.
Yeah,
Turns
cancel that
out,
order, guys. Don't anyone click that button just yet.
cancel that order. It turns out
No, I'm ordering anyway.
They don't do a yeast nutrient. So go.
Chris is
go
off to
check
make
out.
some hard seltzer.
Yeah, he's gonna go make some vodka.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, it's interesting. I
Do
didn't
it. Do it
realize.
for science, Chris.
I didn't
Come on,
realize
you know you
actually
want
they
to.
do lots of other yeasts for, champagne and wine and spirits and all of this sort of stuff. Not just beer.
Yeah, they got a rum yeast. I've not seen that
Yeah.
one before.
Yeah.
Prometheus.
Was that Prometheus?
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, there's lots of people out there that like to make, like to distill and all the rest of it. Cool. Oxygenating wort. When and why, guys?
So, I mean, this is one of the things that comes in when you're talking about dried versus liquid, isn't it? And the general consensus seems to be nowadays that dried yeast, there's no need, because the dried yeast has been dried at the point where it doesn't require the oxygen anymore, because it's at the point of, Chris will jump in hopefully with the correct terminology here, but the point of its growth where it's already used the oxygen, and therefore doesn't necessarily need the oxygenated wort, whatever you want to call it. Whereas liquid yeast has not been through that point. I'm running very dry on terminology here, Chris.
As far
I
as
think
I'm
Tricky's looking
aware,
for some help here, Chris.
Yeah, help
as
me
far
out,
as
dude.
I'm aware, there are additional nutrients in dried yeast as part of the drying process, which means you don't really need to oxygenate dry.
But isn't it
yeast.
also the point at which they dry it, or
I don't know. I don't remember talking to anyone about that.
I thought we did. I thought maybe we
I feel
talked
like,
to a
yeah,
yeast producer at some
Laumond.
point.
Is it
about
Lance?
that. It might have been Lalamond.
it would have more likely been Laumond, because
Yeah.
obviously Amiga don't do dry yeast apart from their
That is true.
Lutra. Yeah.
Oh well, I mean, message Alex. She should know.
But anyway, for some reason, the general consensus is that you don't necessarily need to do it for dry yeast. For me personally, and it's sort of something that I kind of do by default, just because of the way that I transfer beer into the FV, is that all of my wort ends up getting pretty well oxygenated on the way in, because my method is to sort of filter the wort on the way out rather than in the kettle itself. So it kind of goes into the FE and also through a filter bag, and gets very well oxygenated, I think, by doing that, because it's not just splashing into the FE, it's kind of going through a filter mesh and sort of, spraying out of that on the way in as well. So, get a lot of oxygenation through that route, and it seems to not cause, well, I assume it helps with the liquid yeast, but on the flip side, it also doesn't cause any issues with dry yeast either. So for me, it's almost like I don't know whether there's any reason not to do it for dry yeast, and I do it, and it seems to make sure, or it might be one of the things that contributes to good fermentations for the liquid yeast. So it's a difficult one for me, because it's kind of like I do it for everything, because I don't really know whether it's a benefit or not for either version of it. But I don't know if you guys have got any experience either way to say otherwise. So
I'll be honest, I was buying yeast. I've no idea what you're talking about.
Oxygenating your wort.
I kind of used to sort of obsess about it quite a bit and be trying to like sort of trickle in the wort from a great height and making a right old mess whilst doing it. And I've also kind of used various sort of attachments at the end of my transfer tube to try and kind of promote that.
Yeah.
I think the latest one I bought was the kind of sparge niblet from Kegland. The problem with that, it gets plugged really easily. It's got quite a narrow sort of exit point, So even just a little bit of hops or a little bit of grain or whatever, it can just plug it up, and then you transfer super slow. So I've kind of abandoned that in the end. There's some interesting, like, has anyone seen those sort of stainless steel nozzles that kind of spiral? Seen those?
I have seen them, the ones that cause cavitation.
Uh, yeah, sort of. I'd have to find an image of one, but
I
you
know
can,
what you're saying. Yeah,
in
they're
different forms, and they kind of spiral down to a point. So
Yeah.
at least you kind of get a bit of
Spraying.
spraying, right? And I think that's certainly not going to do any harm. I've sort of abandoned trying to worry about it too much, and I don't think I've seen any significant downsides of it. Where I might be more inclined to try and make sure that I do cover that off is either lagers or very high gravity beers. It's probably the only time I'm going to worry about it.
Yeah, I think that's a
Lags
fair
or
point.
impies, yeah.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Or if for whatever mental reason I wanted to try and do a double IPA or a triple IPA or something like that.
Well, one of the things that Lance talked about was oxygen is required for the aerobic phase of budding. So when the yeast are going through the budding phase, that tends to be an aerobic phase of reproduction. So they require oxygen for that. As far as how do I do it, I pump my shit out the kettle directly into the fermenter at rather high velocity. So I rely on splashing and extreme cavitation to give me my oxygen content.
Yeah.
But I think that with dry yeast, it's not as much of a thing. I think with liquid yeast, it's much more of a thing, especially if you've gone through a 2 or a 3 stage starter.
Yeah.
You need that, but that's at the same point where you really need the nutrient as well. So it's kind of, yeah. It does it need it? If it's dried, probably not. If it's liquid, probably yes. But is splashing it into the fermenter enough? That's kind of where it comes.
Yeah.
People who are squirting oxygen in, I mean, I get it if you're doing impies that are starting at 1.12 or whatever. But as far as, standard, like, gravity lagers and ales, I'm not sure it's required anything beyond splashing.
The yeast book, which I've actually got on the table in front of me at the minute, makes quite a big deal out of oxygenation. Sort of says, in order to reach the optimum level, you basically have to use like injected oxygen into the wort because it's not feasible to get there through just splashing the wort in or
because 20% of what you're splashing is
DIY.
oxygen.
Yeah, the sort of DIY methods of doing that, and it sort of makes out that it's kind of quite important. But then the graphs on it at the end, which sort of say what the actual results are like you might see a minor difference in attenuation rate. So it's kind of like it's really important, and you have to have an oxygen tank, and then it's kind of like actually the difference is maybe going to be a couple of points at the end. So yeah, it might make a little bit of a measurable difference, but not. I mean, certainly in my experience, I mean, it's not like I've had beers where I've gone, oh, it's clearly the issue that I didn't oxygenate that wort enough. How would you even know? I don't.
Do you remember there used to be a period of time where people were using like aquarium pumps and stuff like that with like diffusion stones, and then just if you didn't change the filters in the pump, you just end up with infections because you're just like pulling in just whatever's coming by the pump straight into your beer or into your wort. I don't think people tend to do any of that anymore, do they? But I've always found trying to locate oxygen, tanks of oxygen in this country.
But they probably are. You know what really makes me fucking chuckle, right? Is you've got these guys who brew Lodo, right? So they've got the low oxygen beers, and they're not splashing anything, and then they'll fucking inject oxygen at the end. It's like, why? Yeah, I don't understand it. Maybe there is something to it, but I don't understand it.
I think it's
Okay?
just one of those. My take on it is it's one of those areas where, like, yeah, there might be a measurable difference, but the amount that some people think that it makes a difference versus what the actual measurable difference is, perception-wise, is like so minimal that it's really not worth worrying about. And nobody that we know who homebrews uses an oxygen tank, and yeah, I'd like to say that there's lots of people that I know, present company included, that are producing beers that are comparable to commercial beer. And I mean, how many commercial breweries you go into where they're injecting oxygen into the wort?
None.
None that I've seen. I've not
None that
seen
I've
any
been
commercial
into.
breweries that do that. So, yeah, it's a bit of a non conversation for me, to be honest. Really, like the whole oxygenating thing.
I don't know. I kind of understand it from a science point of view, but I think the reality is it's probably a yeah.
I just think you're always gonna sort of end up with enough oxygen dissolved by default
Yes.
for it to be okay, and
Yes.
you might see a minor improvement with a bit more, but it's not gonna really be a deal breaker either way. Yeah.
I agree completely.
Right. So,
You know.
Chris, tell us about Fan, because I don't really know what.
Okay,
we're talking
so
about here.
free amino nitrogen.
Brace yourself, people. Science incoming.
Science time. Strap in. So, free amino nitrogen is one of those things that we talked about recently. Hoddy talks about it a lot. At commercial levels, it's quite important because of the amount of yeast that you're putting in, and to ensure that optimum fermentation, free amino nitrogen is something that's important. So, free amino nitrogen is a critical parameter in beer analysis that indicates the amount of food available for the yeast. That's bullshit. It's not really the amount of food, it's the amount of cofactors for the production of everything. Okay, and it helps them convert sugar into alcohol during the brewing process more effectively. So, as is defined as a sum, it is defined as a sum of the individual amino acids, ammonium ions, and small peptides. Now, by small peptides, we are talking di and tripeptides. So, for those of you who remember biology or biochemistry from school, a codon is 3 amino acids, okay? The reality is a di or a tri is 2 or 3 amino acids bound together, okay? And they're in the wort. Fan is important for yeast health and also for growth, and proper fan levels are determined by using suitable malts and a correct mashing process. This is where I have an issue with adding fan at the homebrew level, okay? But we'll talk about that in a minute. For vigorous fermentation, for appropriate fermentation, a sufficient quantity of fan should be present in the wort, but an excessive concentration can cause increased production of fusel alcohols, and it can cause spoilage of the finished beer, so your beer can go off faster. A general rule of thumb is 150 milligrams per litre, and that is ideal. Now, there has been many conversations from people talking about free amino nitrogen and the addition of free amino nitrogen to the wort during... Yes, I did, Mark, absolutely. But free amino nitrogen, adding it during the mash, before, adding it during the boil, things like that. This is one of those things whereby with current modified malts on the homebrew level with a first generation of yeast, is it required? I spoke to Lance about this. I asked him specifically about free amino nitrogen, and what he said was no, because we add it to our liquid pouches. If you're making a starter and doing a 2-stage, is it required at that point? Maybe. That's why we use nutrient, because it contains all these things. It's kind of one of those things. Is it something that you need to worry about? The answer is not really as a home brewer. But if you're reusing yeast, you're repitching, you're pitching onto a yeast cake, yes, you probably could do with some. Do you need to worry about what you're adding? Just add some nutrient and you should be fine. And that's pretty much free amino nitrogen in a nutshell.
Nice. That didn't get too sciencey either. Thanks, Chris.
No problem, bud.
So is
I'm
that
trying-
another something to know about but not necessarily worry about kind of thing?
Yes.
In essence, really.
It depends on how often you're reusing. Like, a lot of people will take a scoop in a jar, stick it in a fridge, wait for it to settle, decant off the liquid, and then, like, basically rinse the solid bit back into their next beer.
Yeah.
At that point, you should probably be using a yeast nutrient which contains stuff like free amino nitrogen, the diammonium phosphate, and all the other bits and bobs. That will probably help that beer kick off better.
So this is kind of coming back to yeast nutrients, really, more than
It is.
ban as a separate thing that
It
you
is.
might want to be adding in or whatever.
But most of the yeast nutrients contain free amino nitrogen as part of the deal.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that little spiel there, you mentioned suitable malt and correct mashing process.
Yes.
And generally speaking, a typical malt bill is going to be fine, right? But you're probably going to be more of a concern if you're using a malt bill that's got like a really high level of, I don't know, like adjuncts in it or something like that, or I don't know, like you're doing like a lager with loads of flaked rice or something like that in it that might cause an issue. In which case, and I think that's generally a fairly well-known thing anyway, that with those kinds of beers, maybe the yeast nutrient becomes more important then. So
absolutely, yes.
And again, that's maybe coming back to this as well as the other nutrient requirements for it. But what about the mashing process would affect that?
As far as I'm concerned, and as far as I'm aware, if you're mashing within the normal range, you're fine. That's basically,
unless you're doing something wildly like
if you're doing like a step mash where you're starting from the bottom end and doing like, you know, your 3-step mash, 48, 50 whatever and 60 whatever, that's kind of where you would need to use, or it might be beneficial to use something like free amino nitrogen because of the denaturing of proteins all the way through. They're not going to be as accessible to the yeast at that point, so you might want to use something then. But if you're doing like a standard, you know, chuck a fucking bunch of malt in at 68 degrees and let it ride for an hour with a bit of mixing, then you're fine. That's my research anyway. Your mileage may vary, but that's my research. And as long as you throw some nutrient in, you're fine.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that's fan.
Don't worry about that then.
Yeah. Back in a sec.
So I think the next topic of discussion is kind of really centered around what does yeast contribute, or how does yeast contribute to beer flavour? I think we're going to probably get into some of the science, which I'm sure Chris will delight in taking us through. Tricky, do you want to take us through kind of some of the compounds that yeast contribute to beer?
Well, we can make a start on it, and hope that we
by the time
do it justice.
I reckon Chris will be back by then.
Yeah, in the absence of the actual scientist. So it's well, again, actually, I did read something in the book earlier on this about yeast, which said something like there was something like 500 different potential sort of flavor compounds and or other chemicals is probably the wrong word to use, but
no, it's the right word.
Right word to use. That yeast can contribute to beer across the board, and some of them are very well known. Some of them will have a minor impact. Some of them will have virtually no impact at all after going through the course of fermentation and everything else. But potentially up to 500 different things that it can do. So it's a massive influence on the flavour of beer, and in the absence of those things, if it was we talk about clean fermentation a lot, don't we? Like, you want to have a clean fermentation, all the rest of it. But I think that the point the book was making on that front was that if you had a literally like actually completely clean fermentation, it just converted the sugar into alcohol and did nothing else, you would have an extremely bland and boring and very uninteresting beer as a result.
It's a shit beer.
100%. So, coming back to sort of almost the whole point of this episode is kind of like going, well, you don't want to get to the point where your yeast is doing nothing in the beer. You want to get to the point where it's doing the good things for you, and you're encouraging the yeast to create these beneficial flavor impacts, but not going to the point where it's becoming an off flavor or something that's going to be negatively impacting the beer. And interestingly as well, there's a lot of these different flavor compounds where for certain beers they're to style and they're a benefit, and to other beers they become an off flavor because they're not what you're actually wanting in that beer. So we've got a few examples which are relevant to that, and probably one of the main ones, I guess, is as regards to one that can be considered an off flavor in some cases, and a characteristic is your isoamyl acetate, which is the banana flavor. So you're brewing a Hefe, you want a little bit of banana flavor in there. For some Belgian styles, a little bit of banana bubblegum type flavor, great. Put that into almost any other beer and you're gonna go, why does it taste of foam bananas? Like, I don't want that in the beer.
Don't want it in a lager, do you, Tricky?
No. Or let's let's park that one. But I see where you're going. You were setting a trap for me there, Chris.
Oh yes,
fell right into it. He was fishing there.
Yeah.
Do you want me to do this one with all the chemical names and stuff?
Yeah. Well, go on then. I managed to get isoamyl acetate without
you did
fumbling
it.
so I'll let you go on.
Before you do, Chris, dive into all of that. I think just to expand on the point Tricky made about how much yeast contributes to the flavour and presentation of beer is I don't think it's necessarily just about flavour. I think yeast also adds a lot of other attributes like mouthfeel.
Oh yeah.
Is
totally.
a huge, yeast contributes massively to mouthfeel, and we talk a lot about kind of adjuncts, mash temperatures, stuff like that. Obviously all of those are levers to mouthfeel, but actually yeast is a massive contribution as well. And I think it's probably underestimated a lot of the time about how much yeast contributes to the flavour of beer, as we've discovered in the last podcast, using saturated in the hazies, and that kind of overall kind of peachy, nectarine, stone fruit contribution actually is really just driven from the yeast more so than the hops. And we talk a lot about hops generally in craft beer, right? Because, the love for the haze or the hazy beer. But I think yeast sadly just gets a little bit overlooked. Like, how many craft beer drinkers do you come across that talk about the yeast that's been used?
Not very
and
many.
The flavour contribution that's providing.
It's always hops, isn't it? And maybe malt's mentioned as a sort of side note, and then yeast is somewhere behind that. It would be amazing, wouldn't it, to have the time and the capacity to do an experiment where you just did a plain wort that's bittered with, I don't know, flex or something like that, and then you just ferment it out with different yeasts and just analyze that.
Be interesting, wouldn't
side by side.
Be interesting.
I'm just saying, Dibs. I'm definitely not getting involved in making one of those for purposes of,
like I said, that was wishful thinking. What I want
Just-
is a commercial brewery to volunteer themselves to give us those beers to try rather than doing it ourselves, because we'd just be like, well, we've brewed 5 different really shit bland beers here, but subtle differences from the yeast, which is nice to talk about. Now I've got to work through the next 20 litres of it in the keg. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I think I think there's a lot to be said for yeast. And to be fair, of all the people that I know that I talk to about beer, there's one lad at jiu-jitsu who I talk to, and there's probably Owen, Tricky, and Andy that I talk to about yeast, and that's because it is a very nuanced, kind of subtle, borderline insignificant, but not insignificant, if you get what I'm saying, and often overlooked is probably the best way of describing it. Characteristic of a beer is what the yeast brings. And we all know that, certain Kolsch yeast can bring something, that there are certain ale yeast that can bring something, but the only beer where it's ever really talked about what the yeast brings is a Hefe or a wit beer to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Those are really the only
The more
ones where it's...
predominant.
Yeah.
Belgian beers
Yeah.
generally. But
Oh, yeah, Belgians.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely Belgians. But, we're talking about these as if it's kind of some magical lever that you can twist and pull and pop, and yeah, it does bring something, but if you're sticking 200 grams per litre in your dry hop, it's kind of going to get washed out. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it enhances it, but I do think that listening to a bunch of homebrewers talk about yeast strains, I'd probably liken to sitting down and listening to some train spotters chatting about
Yeah.
different train types. I don't even
Yeah.
know what they'd call them.
We need what's his face, Lance, to talk about train types, don't we? Really?
Yeah, we probably.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure we do actually, Chris. But
I mean, we could ignore him quite happily. So,
but no, Lance loves his trains, as I'm sure many people do. But I think my point was it's a very niche, fringe level of conversation, isn't it?
very much,
Yeah.
yes.
So let's
Yeah,
enjoy
true.
it. Let's enjoy
Yeah.
it.
So shall I jump into what the yeast contribute to beer
Fire away,
flavour?
Chris. Fire away.
Okay, this one might be quite a long one, boys, so strap in. So the contributors from yeast to beer flavour can be broadly categorised into several chemical classes. And these include esters, higher alcohols, phenols, and terpenes. Okay? Esters are formed via a reaction between an alcohol and an acid during fermentation. Mostly these give floral or fruity flavours, and that is why the yeast makes a difference when it comes to flavour as opposed to more with the aroma, because esters are quite well soluble. A good example of this would be, as Tricky was said, even though he said it wrong, isoamyl acetate, which is banana.
Did I say isoamyl? Was that
You
what
did.
was wrong? Oh,
You
sorry.
did. You said it wrong. I've trained you for 4 years, 5 years, in fact, and you still fucked it up. So another one is ethyl acetate, which is also known as acetyl acetate. But the fruity, solventy type flavour and aroma, kind of reminiscent of pear drops or something like that. Kind of one of those kinds of flavours. The higher alcohols, also known as fusels, which everybody will know, are alcohols specifically such as propan-1-ol or isopropyl alcohol and 2-methyl propanol. They can give a burning nose, but they contribute to the body. I use quite a lot of 2-methyl propanol at work, and not only is it a solid at room temperature, which is really fucking irritating, it also has this incredible smell. It's phenomenal. I love 2-methyl propanol. I don't smell it very often because we only use it for 2 practicals, but it is actually a really pleasant sort of alcohol, let's say. They also contribute to the body, but they can give you a bit of a burn on the nose. Phenolics such as syringol and guaiacol give the smoky and the spicy flavours in Rauch beer. Phenolics are not something that you want a lot of in a beer. They can be very, very, very overwhelming. But they also give clove flavours and the white pepper flavours, which is dependent upon the yeast strain and the fermentation conditions. So a Rauch beer does get some of its smoky flavour from the malt, but it can also pick up quite a lot due to metabolism by the yeast from the yeast, if you get what I'm saying. There are terpenes, which are predominantly found in hops. These are responsible for earthy, herbal, citrusy flavours and aromas in beer. Myrcene, which is an example of a terpene, gives certain beers a pungent, earthy, and grassy character. So think Hersbrucker, think Fuggles, think that kind of thing for your earthy, grassy. And everybody's favourite hop, Citra, is very high in D-limonene. So you've got D and L for the different handedness of the molecule, and then limonene, which is obviously why it's called Citra, because it's got loads of limonene in it. Yeast can also give off flavours which come from, well, they're definitely a contributor that comes from the yeast, which is things like DMS, diacetyl. They're the two main culprits. And while underpitching can lead to acetaldehyde and a green apple flavour. So those are essentially the flavours that the yeast are going to contribute. There are others, but those are the main ones. And let's face it, you all wanted to know about Citra because you're those kind of people.
Just to add on that kind of last point around acetaldehyde, I think I've had a bit of experience with that, and my experience, or at least hypothesis, is that tends to occur when you pitch less than ideally healthy yeast, rather than necessarily the pitch rate. It tends to be a reflection of yeast health. Diacetyl, as we both know, tends to be a naturally occurring result of fermentation. You have to compensate for that depending on the beer style through your process, through fermentation process, or use some ALDC, which is available from the malt miller.
Acetolactate decarboxylase.
Yes, which is super handy because it just kind of prevents the production of diacetyl in the first place.
It prevents the production of SMM, doesn't it?
Yes, I think so.
S-methylmethionine, yeah, which is a fucking horrible smelling chemical on its own. Never mind the diacetyl that it then gets produced into by the yeast.
Yeah, and diacetyl is like one of those things that I'm not super sensitive to actually, but I think if you get a lot of it in a beer, it's very, very off-putting, as I've recently discovered. In one beer, DMS I don't think really tends to be a major issue these days because of
depends on your level of boil.
Yeah, you obviously want a bigger
I was going to say, I think that's something that equipment related almost. I mean, that's more of the yeast affects it after the fact, doesn't it? Almost, it's not so much
yeast becomes a multiplier for it almost
on its own. It's what's gone on before that. But I've had a couple of beers where DMS has been a bit of an issue, and I think it's also related to the malts you're using as well.
Yeah,
obviously in terms of how well is it the kilning, I think, that is modification of the malt, perhaps. I can't remember quite exactly what factors play into that.
Lower kiln malt,
because it's lager malts generally are more prone to it, aren't they? So
the worst one of all is literally lager malt.
Yeah,
that'll give you fucking diacetyl through the yin yang. Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, the setup I use with the Buffalo induction plate, it's not the most vigorous boil ever. It gets going really well initially, but I think the issue, I mean, like I said, it's only really happened a couple of times for me, but I think perhaps if there's beers where you maybe don't have the best boil rate, and then particularly if you're then holding it at sort of the higher temperatures, you got like an extended whirlpool, for example, and things like that. Sometimes that can give it more time for the DMS to reform and things like that as well. So, like I said, it's not a major issue, but I have noticed that a couple of times. Owen's just making a quick edit on the notes there.
Oh my God, Owen, do you really want that? I mean, that's in block capitals, bro.
Exclamation mark.
So we might be going to a commercial break shortly, guys. So line up a beer just in case you want to join us on that one. But yeah, I don't really know where I was going that, other than saying that DMS for me, I think, was mainly just because induction plate doesn't necessarily give the most vigorous boil all the way through. I don't know why it initially sort of will almost be throwing wort out, and then later on, even though it's still set to maximum, it tends to be more of a shimmering boil rather than a really bubbling, rolling sort of boil. But anyway,
You know what you need to fix that, Tricky?
what's that?
Craft beer pie.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of do want to do that, and I would like to just upgrade to get a bigger kettle anyway, so I can, because basically everything else in the system is set up for a double batch, apart from the kettle, really, at the minute.
Get a kettle then. Stop being a bitch.
But it's like I like having the not having the element in the kettle. That is one thing I really do like about the induction hob, is just the fact that it's not heating via an element, so I don't have to worry about element scorching and just all that.
You only have
sort
to
of
worry about element scorching if you're a complete noob.
stuff. Okay.
True.
Okay.
You know, that's all I'm saying. Do
Yeah.
it. Go craft beer pie. Go on, do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it.
Maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, I think at that point, Owen really badly wants to go to a commercial break. So let's take this to the commercial break.
So yeah, listen, I had someone fairly recently, earlier this week actually, say to me at Homebrew Club, at the Butcher's Homebrew Club, saying he really misses the commercial break, because I think actually it's kind of almost been phased out slightly because of the volume of kind of guest oriented
Yeah.
that we've
Not
had.
deliberately, was it? It's just not
It's
been
not.
appropriate to the
It's-
pods in
Yeah,
recent times.
it's-
So
it's just been something that's just happened.
we've missed it too.
Yeah, so I think, and they were like, bring back the commercial break, and I'm all for this. I think it's always a lot of fun, talking about commercial breaks, and actually for a lot of people, it kind of broadens a bit of horizon in terms of available breweries, trying different beers, and so on and so forth. So I think it's good. I'm going to bring it back. Let's do it.
Fucking hell, okay.
Oh,
Do you want-
Chris is going big.
Bearing that in mind, Owen, do you want to start us off? Have you got
I-
something
I-
ready to
I've
go?
still got something else in the glass, so yeah,
All right.
you guys crack on.
Well, I've got one in the glass ready to go, so I can go first if you want.
Go for it, Tricky.
I'll give you 3 guesses what brewery I've got.
Oh, could it start with T and end in K?
Yeah, you got it. First time. I can't believe you
No,
guessed.
no, I know what
How
it
did
is.
you
It's not
manage
track. It's not track. It's not track. It's going to be London Pride.
No.
Bishop's Finger.
Not tonight.
Dirty Badger.
So this is Response IPA by Track. They love their New Zealand hops recently, so almost everything seems to have some kind of New Zealand hop in it, and a lot of them have Nelson, and I'm pleased to say this one does as well. So it's Nelson Sauvin HBC 1019. So HBC numbered hops are the experimental varieties from the American companies. I believe it's the people associated with Yakima Chief that do that anyway. So 6.5% IPA by Track, as you would expect. Absolute murky, hazy, juicy looking beer, and the aroma is, yeah, definitely Nelson character, but there's a really sweet sort of fruity character on it. It's got that kind of like juicy fruit gum kind of aroma with some limey, grapey, gooseberry Nelson stuff on there. It smells really good. I did actually get a pack of these beers, and I think this is the last one, so it's still tasting really good after working through the other few. It's basically your standard really good quality Track IPA. Lovely mouthfeel, smooth, low bitterness, juicy fruity flavour, creamy mouthfeel. Yeah, it's a lot sweeter. I don't know whether this is the 1019 that's influencing it, but the flavour is a lot sweeter and more sort of juicy than what you would necessarily normally get with Nelson sort of based IPA, so it's not quite as sort of that sort of kind of like zesty tart sort of gooseberry note to it. It's a bit more of a sweet kind of grape flavour
You're
to it. So
riding
I
the
guess,
Nelson horse tonight, aren't
guess
you?
what? Yeah, I guess whatever the 1019 is doing there with the Nelson is working really well because it's just making it into this. It's almost like a like candy sweet. I want to say like, but yeah, no, it's almost like a sort of. It's reminding me a little bit of almost like a Skittles type sort of fruity candy flavour in there, which is really quite enjoyable, to be honest. So yeah, it's delicious. I don't know if they've got any of that left, but if you see it in the bottle shop or anywhere, I would recommend getting that one.
I apologise. I
Cheers.
just realised I didn't have my microphone muted when I was tapping my can. Sorry.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Who
do
go
you want me
next?
to jump in?
If you want.
So I've just dragged something out that's not 13%.
Oh, I was wanting you to drink that MP, Chris. Come on.
Well, I mean, this is 6.9, so
All right, I'll allow it. Carry on.
this is Breakfast Club 3, the Blueberry Stout from Vocation, special edition. I really like the Vocation Stouts. I think they're doing something really, really good with them, to be fair. And it just smells amazing. It smells literally like a stack of pancakes with blueberries and maple syrup on it. It really just smells amazing.
That's quite a long-running one, isn't it? They bring it back, like,
Yeah.
as a regular release. Cause...
I think that's why they're on version 3 of it.
Yeah.
But it's a great beer. I've had it before, but one of the things that I like about this one is the blueberries aren't as prominent, so it's more of a pastry stout, if that makes sense, rather than like a fruited pastry stout. So there's more of the pancake coming through. There's more of kind of that. I want to say almost chewiness. Sounds weird, but if you know what I'm saying, it's almost like it's a very thick beer. It's a very hefty beer, but the flavour there's quite a lot of that sort of blueberry flavour on the tongue, but not so much on the aroma. There's more of the thick stout with a hint of chocolate on the tongue. But on the aroma, it's just pastry. It's like having a croissant in front of you. It's almost buttery. It's really nice. It's obviously not diastole. Diastole buttery, but it is a really nice beer. And it's thick and it's heavy and it's coating. And I'm gonna drink this one slowly because I don't want to be too pissed because I've got to dig a frigging garden tomorrow again. So
Yeah, I don't remember the original being quite that big. I think the original was a collab with Yeasty Boys, wasn't it? The Breakfast
may well
Club
have been.
beer. Yeah, I
May
remember
well have been.
drinking that years ago and even trying to replicate it quite early on in my homebrewing career. Didn't go well.
We've talked about that before.
Yeah, we have chatted about them. You mentioning croissants today, I had a funny experience. 2 funny experiences actually. I went and played golf this morning. I was warming up on the green and spotted a guy getting his golf gear out of his car, and he had a cup of coffee and a sandwich that he'd obviously opened. But he had his boot up, and what he couldn't see was a seagull was just eating his sandwich on the roof of his car, where he'd put his coffee and his sandwich on the roof. And then later on in the round, my playing partner, or one of the guys I was playing with, got a croissant out of his bag, had 2 bites of it, rested it on the top of his bag to play a
Got
shot,
nicked by a seagull.
and then a crow came along and nicked his croissant, and then promptly sat in the tree and laughed at him.
This is the reason why you don't play golf.
It sounds like you got some vengeful, like, bird life around that golf course. Though.
Vengeful bird life for sure, yeah. Yeah, wild. But yeah, back to the topic. Beer sounds good, Chris.
I'll be honest, the blueberry's coming through a bit more now. It's nice, and it's not like fresh blueberry. This is kind of like a blueberry compote kind of concentration coming through. Yeah, that kind of thing. Weirdly enough, I'm now craving wholemeal toast with blueberry jam on it.
Yeah.
It's really nice. I'll be honest, This is a great beer, and if you haven't had it, you really should. It's amazing.
I wouldn't mind having another bash at making something like that. Actually, might seek out a couple of cans. Where did you
Feel
get,
feel
where you
like you're a
picked it
bit
up at
more
Vacation, did you?
Direct from
bit more
vocation,
qualified
mate.
for doing that sort of beer after having Damien on, right? When you can
I think so. Yeah.
go. This is how you actually add like fruit and all those crazy adjuncts into a beer.
Yeah.
You see, this is
maple
why,
syrup.
boys, you start a podcast.
Yeah.
So that you can get these amazing brewers on. You can pick their brains and find out exactly how they do it.
Although having said that, it means you're going to spend about 100 quid on that batch of beer and just be like
Only
throwing
100?
all sorts of shit in there.
Only 100 quid.
Well, that was a, you know,
Are we going for a 7% rather than the normal 14
a pessimistic sort of estimate of the pricing. Yeah.
No, it's a great beer, and to be fair, Vocation have got a deal on at the moment. If you go head over to their website for the bank holiday weekend, they've got quite a discount on quite a few of their beers. Sweet Temptation, highly recommended. Anything barrel aged, highly recommended. But also grab some of their dark beers, but also things like what's it called, Bread and Butter, which is a
Hop, skip, and juice.
hop,
It's
skip,
great.
and juice. Bread and Butter is a fantastic beer.
I will say I was surprised by the because they've got a few sour beers that they put out into supermarkets, and I've been surprised by the aggressiveness of the
Oh, it's
sour beers
aggressive.
that they put out.
Have you had the cherry
Yes.
one? Is it
I
Death by
think so,
Cherries?
yeah,
It's called
yeah.
something like that one. It's like
No, but the lime one, I think, that wasn't a lime, it was a margarita sour.
that's
I
a
think.
good one as well.
And that was like proper, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
get
It wasn't the
yourself
sort of
over
thing
to
that I would
Vocation,
expect to
boys.
see in a supermarket.
No, they're amazing. They're really, really amazing. You should definitely head over to Vocation, especially with the discount they've got on for the bank holiday weekend, and get yourself a stack of beers in. They have some really, really good deals on, and there's some amazing beers over there. There's one of them. It's got like a Dia de Muerta, like a skull on it, which incidentally is going to be my next tattoo. But I think it's a cherry sour, and I had it at their tap room at Hebden Bridge. It's absolutely phenomenal. Really, really
You
good.
do this to me every time, Chris.
I know, mate. I know.
Every
Well,
bloody time.
can I just point out that
can't-
after you talking about the bloody yeast, I've just ordered 9 packs of yeast from the malt miller.
We don't do each other any good, do we?
We don't, mate. We
I
should
re-
stop being on a podcast together.
Probably should. That's it,
Yeah.
guys. You heard it here first.
We're done. Fuck it.
Well, I can't financially continue to do this because of my obsession with purchasing.
I have to say, also,
homebrew.
I got 9 packs of yeast from the malt miller for £24.44.
That is pretty good, to be fair.
And I got 2 packs saturated, 1 pack of Einstein, 1 pack of Après Ski, 2 packs of Sweet Release, 2 packs of Haze Heaven, and yes, Tricky, I bought a pack of Blitz Lager because I'm going to make a Kolsch.
As long as you're making a Kolsch with it, mate.
I'm
that's
making
fine.
a Kolsch with it, mate. And that came to £24.44, and I saved £10.67, which I thought was a bonus. And Liam, shut up, Yorkshire's the best.
Yorkshire.
Yorkshire.
Yeah, that's why in the 2012 Olympics, if Yorkshire had been a country, we'd have been 5th in the medal table. Where was Lancashire? Where was it? Yeah? 32nd. Shush.
Based on one metric, Yorkshire's better than Lancashire.
And if you want to phone God, it's only 10p.
Is that right?
Yeah, because it's a local call, mate. This is where he lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Very good. So,
Where we at?
moving on. So I grabbed a couple of beers out of the fridge because I thought I'm going to bring back the commercial beer, and I got some elusive beers. And the
nice.
reason I got some elusive beers is because, and I'm going to give my homebrew club a little plug here. They recently did a collab with Elusive for their 10th anniversary. So the homebrew club has been going for 10 years. I haven't been involved in it for 10 years, but nonetheless. And they brewed a West Coast IPA. And I thought I had 2 cans of it. Turns out that I don't. And I've drunk the 1 can that I had. And I thought I grabbed it. And it turns out I didn't. But I've got another can coming. So I'm going to save the review for a future commercial break to talk about that. The beer I did grab is called Mangotron, which is a Citra and Mango Pale Ale at 4.7%.
Mango.
I'll read you what it says on the can. We took our base pale ale recipe and added lots of Citra hops for notes of peach and citrus fruits before adding layers of fresh mango to elevate the Citra and deliver something super fruity and refreshing, dry but with moderate bitterness to allow the fruit to shine. I'm going to just say, off the bat, I haven't tried this yet. I haven't pursed it to my lips yet. But just on the aroma, is sometimes I get like a, oh, that smells nice. Other times you get like you know when you sort of sit next to the wrong person on the bus?
Sweaty.
Yeah.
Almost
like,
acrid.
Ooh, bad BO scenario. Which I think is probably like the dank from the Citra and just the kind of really sweaty mango. So this is like super sweaty mango on the aroma. It's a pretty clear pale ale. There's some good clarity to it. I'm expecting a decent beer from Elusive. Let's give it a little taste. All right. So listen, it's not like when you have fruit in a beer, in a commercial beer, and I honestly thought I was going to pour this out and it's just going to be like super chunky and thick and, you know, absolutely oozing with fruit. They've added this mango with a real deft hand, almost like it's just a little back layer of mango, and it's really pleasant actually on the flavour, and it's wonderfully balanced. There's a great bitterness to the beer that just carries it through, because I think actually when you add fruit to a beer, sometimes it can get a little bit overly sweet. It's dank. It's got an initial fruit flavour that's up front that's like, oh, that's a lovely bit of mango. Cuts through into a bit of hop, then into a bit of bitterness. Nice malt backbone. Decent beer, actually. But you do have to get over the slight bus friend BO. Questions?
Why don't we have digital rights to play Barry White over every one of your commercial break beers?
I don't know. I think we probably have to purchase it. I'm really enjoying it.
I'll be honest with you, mate. Everybody went silent. Nobody said a goddamn thing.
That's what I was singing under mute as well. It's
Yeah.
hilarious.
My first,
getting freaky with it.
my last, my everything.
Beautiful.
Oh, bring it back.
Absolutely,
We got told off quite a few times in the end, didn't we? When
We did. We had our what do you call it? Our absolutely non-existent fucking commercial rights, like any revenue we would have got from a video, which we wouldn't have got anyway, removed because of the fact that I played Barry White over your beer reviews.
And I've drunk another Elusive beer tonight as well called Genesis, which was just a straight Simcoe Pale Ale, which was also really great. And I'm actually really getting into Simcoe as a hop. I think it's wonderfully dank. It's just got a really interesting flavour.
Simcoe's amazing, despite what some people might say.
I'm getting into Simcoe. I'm getting into it.
Great.
Well, considering you brewed the UK Simcoe. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, apparently so.
Yeah, and loved it and nailed that keg.
Can I just share with you guys, given that we're still doing the commercial break 25 minutes after we started, can I just share with you guys this specific page on Vocation Brewery? I've had that. That is fucking spectacular. Right? If you are in any way a fan of gooseberries, that is such an absolutely mind-blowing beer that you need to go and buy some. It's a tenner a bottle. Who gives a shit? Just fucking buy that beer.
For a 330 as well.
But dude,
Ooh.
it is absolutely worth every goddamn penny.
To be fair, Chris, I am on that page already. And the Islay Scotch whiskey barrel aged barley wine.
Forget about that. Have you seen the wild berry?
It's taking my
I mean,
particular attention.
Those prices look a little bit steep, but by the standards of barrel aged beers nowadays, it's not off the charts, is it? So
I think that those are like special edition fridge moments, aren't they? Those are like those are reserved for your Christmas evening.
No, they're not. They're reserved for a really good episode of a TV show that you're watching in the house.
Really?
That's what they're reserved for.
I thought you were going to say a really good episode of the podcast where you've got to crack out a special one for the commercial break. You go, well, I wasn't going to drink this before, but now I've got my gooseberry barrel aged.
The plum stout has been aged 48 months on plums. It is dirty, and it's aged in a red wine barrel. It's filth, but it's absolutely worth every penny that you'll pay. If your order to Vocation is not 90 quid, you're doing something wrong. It's such a fantastic set of beers. It's really, really good.
Just to get the range of their barrel aged beers, right, which is 5 330s, would cost you 55 quid.
Yes.
I mean, that's a bit much, to be fair.
No, it's really not tricky. You're looking at it from the wrong perspective. Those aren't beers; they're experiences.
But you can also get 48 440ml cans, a mixed case, for 95 quid.
You can.
You could probably buy a lot of experiences for 50 quid, to be fair.
None as good as those 5 beers, mate.
Depends what street you go to.
This is true.
Not sure what you're implying, Tricky, but
he's implying he's a filth bag, is what he's implying.
Yeah, that's
I didn't mean that.
I will say that the Naughty and Nice chocolate stout case, which has got the chocolate stout, the white chocolate and raspberry, the caramel cookie, and sweet temptation in it, and you get 12 cans, is only 40 quid, and that's worth every goddamn penny just for those 4 beers. They're amazing. Yeah. I think we're bigging up Vocation too much when they're not actually on the podcast, but I absolutely adore that brewery.
Yeah.
I'd agree.
Shall we move on?
Should we get back to the...
I mean, we're just about to go to 2 hours in, and we've just done a commercial break, so I feel like we want to...
We've only got one little section left.
We don't have a lot left, do we?
Well, yeah,
so
that's
I
true.
think we're going to wrap up quick.
The next point is quite an interesting one, I think, as far as... We've talked about yeast health and vitality and everything very much from the starting point so far, and I guess this section is more about like yeast sort of through the fermentation and also to some extent towards the end of it as well. But you need to also be aware of yeast health during and post fermentation to an extent. But this does raise a question in terms of a certain concept which is brought up a lot, which is yeast cleaning up. And does yeast sort of clean up after the fermentation? Do you need to leave the beer alone when it hits final gravity? Is there any sort of legitimate like science behind that?
Somebody said science.
Let's yeah.
I think.
I mean, what
Chris doesn't have
before we let Chris sort of jump in and sort of just torch it to the ground, which I feel like he's going to do. Like, what are your
Not
thoughts on
really.
this, Owen? Like, where do you stand on leaving yeast for a bit of extra time afterwards to clean up the fermentation? What do you think?
I think I'm pro that, just based on my anecdotal experience generally.
Yeah.
Depending on beer style, I think generally as a rule of thumb, try not to rush your home brewing or your beer production. I think a beer's never gonna be worse off for sitting on the yeast for 3, 4, 5 days after terminal gravity, right?
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think when we are talking about lager production, it's like, I think that's very much more the case of where you're expecting the yeast to clean up after itself. And I think, my recent experience of producing that 3470 lager for the Charles Farron piece was, that really needed a good 5, 6, maybe even 7 days
Yeah.
to clean up that diacetyl. So I think diacetyl's probably the main one where you need the yeast to clean up after itself. That's my thoughts.
Shall I do my take before you jump in, Chris?
Go on.
I'm replying to some people who are messaging me directly, so please
Oh, okay.
feel free.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm with you, Owen. But I also think, to an extent, some of this comes from, as you say, sort of trying to rush the fermentation through, and we all sort of think, oh well, it's hit terminal gravity and it's or it's at the gravity that the recipe said it should be at. Therefore, it's done. Therefore, it's okay to stop now and package or do whatever. And in some cases, I think that extra time afterwards is not necessarily yeast cleaning up time. It's actually just letting the fermentation finish properly. Because I've seen it a lot where I've left it that extra week and actually it has still dropped a point or 2 points further down, especially with lager fermentation as well, which is, I think, the one that this is most applicable to, where you go, okay, well, I think it's done, I'm going to keg it, and then oh shit, the off flavors are now sort of popping up, and sometimes that because you've cold crashed before it's actually finished, and then you are then basically packaging an unfinished beer, and you get the resulting issues from that. But yeah, for me, it's almost like it's just that extra bit of patience to sort of say, okay, I think it's finished, I'm going to leave it a week just to make sure. For me, in most cases, yields not necessarily a better beer, but it makes it less likely I'm going to experience those issues with things like diac, acetaldehyde, particularly with lagers. Almost all the problems that I've had in recent times have, it's like I've kind of got my head around the issues at the start of fermentation and how to manage that side of things. If you rush it at the end of fermentation, you can still fuck it up by causing yourself problems that way, and that's when you get into territory of like, I've taken it off the yeast too soon, and now I've got acetaldehyde to worry about, or the diacetyl hasn't cleaned up properly, or whatever it might be. So I'm 100% behind that, but I think a lot of the time it's not that it's necessarily cleaning up. I think it's that you're just arresting the fermentation before it's actually properly finished. At which point, let's cut to Chris for science.
Yeah, let's do some science, shall we? Right. So, essentially, everybody's talking about yeast cleaning up as being something that happens, right? You have to understand what's happening within that solution, right? So you have living, breathing, respiring, fermenting organisms which are within that solution. They are suspended within that solution to a certain extent. Do you honestly think that the only thing that they're fermenting is the sugar? Do you think they're actively sitting there going, no, this isn't sugar, I'm not going to eat that? What they're doing is they're bumping into things They're binding to surface receptors. They're being taken within the cell. They're being fermented. They're being metabolized. That's what they're doing. Okay? So if you think that the yeast wait until the end of fermentation to clean up, you're on crack. Simple. That's like me putting Tricky in a room with 3 tons of salad and 15 chicken wings and saying, I want you to eat the salad first. Guarantee you those chicken wings are going to be gone. But he's going to eat the salad as well. And that's the
Eventually.
point that I'm trying. But that's the point that I'm trying to make. Is there is no preferential for yeast. They metabolize what's around them. They still need to live. They still need to breathe. They still need to respire. They still need to do what they're doing. So the cleanup occurs at the same rate. Anything that can be metabolized gets cleaned up at the same rate as the sugars. So yes, at the end of fermentation, a day or two may be beneficial, but it's not like they wait until the end of fermentation to metabolize the diacetyl. Okay? They don't do that. They kind of they will consume and metabolize what is around them at the time where they're doing it. And that's the way to think of it. It's not something that happens just at the end. It happens all the way through the fermentation process. All you're doing by cranking the temperature up a bit at the end is you're increasing the activity of the yeast. You're making them work faster, which means that anything like diacetyl which is left over, but also any additional sugars which are left over, are going to get metabolized through faster. And so technically, yes, it is a bit of a cleanup, but it's not a cleanup for diacetyl. It's a cleanup for whatever is left. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think that's probably like the mental model I had. I think a lot of the time, this 34% yeast definitely caught me out, and I think I fermented it too cool in the first instance, and I think that's probably why, for whatever reason, it kicked a lot of diacetyl, and I didn't leave it long enough or push the temperature high enough in order for it to clean up. I think most of the time when I've done lager fermentations, I've done a diet rest for 2 or 3 days and then not had an issue. Predominantly because I think, for the most part, it was taking or dealing with it in the during the main fermentation. So it might have even been the case that I didn't even really need to do that.
I think we've had this experience generally where we've been rushing fermentations to get beers out for a podcast.
Yeah.
When we did the Citra Pills thing, my beer was had a bit of diacetyl on it, as I remember, and yeah, I'd rushed it through and been like, oh, it's we've got to final gravity, cold crash, got to get the dry hop in, blah blah blah, and it was just like, could have just done with an extra week, really. So
all I can think of when it comes to that is, mine's sat on the yeast cake for 5 weeks.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. One good question that's just come up from the Lancastrian amongst us is, do I need to be doing diacetyl rest at a specific temperature? No, you don't. Diacetyl rest essentially comes down to time. However, the activity of the yeast comes down to the temperature.
And that's something that when we've had conversations about this before, but you will see certain breweries that are recommending this sort of very traditional approach to it, where they don't even raise the temperature. They'll sort of like start off at a low temperature and then go even lower, and their diacetyl rest is sort of like ramping down over 4 weeks as opposed to doing 2 days going up. So I think the Budvar and Utopian sort of model is something along those lines, and it was funny to see that BrewCon actually with Utopian, where they were basically saying like we do our diet rest at like 6 degrees.
Yeah,
There's
6
people in
or
the
7, wasn't it? Yeah, it was
people in the audience
ridiculous.
sort of going, "Whoa," and this was quite late on. I think they were one of the last people that were doing the talk, and there was quite a lot of pissed people in the audience. They got a bit rowdy about that because they were like, "You can't do diet style rest at 70," you know, all this sort of stuff. And it was like, well, as you said, it was just the yeast was just kept active for longer at a lower temperature, so it will still
Yep.
do the job, just slower. So
And
you're just accelerating the process, as with anything else. Raise the temperature, accelerate the chemical process, right? So,
But you have
That's
to
all it
take
is.
into account, if they are cold crashing over a period of 4 weeks, let's say at 1 degree every 3 days,
yeah,
that yeast ain't going to sleep. That's a Pastorianis. That's doing its thing still,
and that's soft crashing versus like
and that's what
cold
we want to
crashing
talk
as we
about
understand
next.
it. Yeah,
I mean, normally we would get Andy, our our resident pizza crunch haggis eating, kilt wearing fucking Scottish person in to do this chat about soft crashing because he's absolutely in love with this process. But the whole thing is essentially by taking it down slower, what you can end up with is the cleanup being done without the need to raise it and risking off flavors, but also allowing the yeast to chew through anything which is fermentable, and ended up with a beer which has, as I read it, it was a little bit more protein in the actual beer, which hasn't been dragged down by that sudden
Yeah.
crash. And that can actually aid head retention. And what was the other thing that it aids? It aids the size of the bubbles which are created by reducing nucleation points. Yeah, does that pretty much sum it up?
I guess.
I
Yeah.
think we probably pretty well covered Liam's question there.
Yeah.
I think the too long didn't listen answer is probably shoot for 1 or 2 degrees above your sort of final your final fermentation temperature, and if
Yeah.
it's lager, kind of where you sort of ended your lager fermentation.
Yeah. Can we talk about the chemistry of small bubbles versus big bubbles? Because this is really
course we
interesting
can.
for me. I love this one.
How's
Go
that
on then.
yeast related, Dave?
It's not yeast related except for the speed at which you cold crash. Okay, so big bubbles versus
hang
little
on,
bubbles.
just 1 second though on that soft crashing thing, because if the idea is that you would leave more protein in, would that mean that soft crashing is gonna potentially make it clear less quickly, or
No, because you're still going to do an absolute crash.
right?
This is just what I researched on the internet.
No,
but
no.
thought
I
it
mean,
was
I'm
really
not. I'm
interesting.
not like saying that. Sort of trying to pick it apart or anything. But from personal experience, because I've been trying to do this recently with lagers and stuff, doing the sort of soft crash, and actually, in my experience, it seems to be almost more beneficial for the clearing process for me. Where it might just be because it's longer. I don't know. That might be that I'm seeing the results after like a week and a bit rather than after a few days, but.
I thought it was quite interesting because
I feel like anecdotally the beers are clearing down better doing the slower crash.
I would have thought that the slower crash would have allowed. I'm trying to think of how to phrase it because it's clear in my head, but putting it into words is difficult. I
Right.
would have thought that by taking the temperature down slower, you are going to allow the proteins to become sticky in a slower fashion and thus increase the coagulation to allow the beer to clear more. That's my chemical understanding of what's occurring. Because you have to understand that as you drop the temperature, those proteins essentially become less active, and so when they stick together, they're less likely to repel. Zwitterionic, read it. I can't be asked to explain. But essentially, what it would mean is they become sticky without dropping so fast, so they're going to clump more. So when you do hit terminal temperature, it's going to drop down. That's just basically my understanding of it. But the internet says that it allows proteins to stay in solution, or maybe I've read it wrong. Maybe it's proteins are allowed to stay in solution for longer, and therefore allow it to coagulate more and then drop. So, essentially, for beers with a higher protein content. Oh no, because that's bubbles. Ignore that. Forget about that. Move on.
Well, no, I mean, just sticking with that for one point further. As far as the soft crashing, and again, this is very much anecdotal for me personally, but I feel like with the beers that I have soft crashed, that at the point of packaging, kegging those beers, again, this is very anecdotal, and I don't want to put too much stock in this because it might just be like, bias of me thinking that that's what's happening or whatever. But at the point of packaging the beers, they seem to be cleaner and like just tasting a little bit just cleaner.
It would
really
make more
like
sense.
I feel like they're cleaner going into the keg because I've sort of done that slow crashing process, as opposed to sort of hard crashing the beers and then going like, everyone samples the beer at the point of kegging, right? You're gonna go like, just have a little swift taster of that to see how it's getting on. And in a lot of cases, I would be like, okay, well, yeah, that definitely needs a few weeks lagering before it's going to be drinkable. Whereas with the beers that I've been doing recently, specifically talking about lagers here, the soft crash beers, I've been like, I can kind of tell that's going to be a nice beer already before it's going into for that extended sort of lagering period. I don't know if there's anything in that or if anyone else has had similar experiences, but yeah, I feel like there's something in it. I don't know. I feel like it's doing something that's.
I think principally, like, moving the beer between temperature ranges in a much more gradual way feels more appropriate from just treating the yeast in a respectful way, rather than like, I'm just going to bounce this up to 20 degrees for 5 days and then I'm going to drop it down to 1 degree and then sit, and the yeast is like, what the hell's going on?
I'm pretty sure there's something somewhere that somebody said, or something that's been posted that said about that process, that extreme cold crash makes the yeast kick out actually compounds that are
definitely
negative. So
well, it's the
would it be
same thing that
lipids
happens
and
with
stuff or something like that they would be.
Well, you've got to remember, right, that yeast and humans are very similar genetically, okay? And because we're very similar genetically, there's a reason why if you go on Facebook, you're going to see all these adverts for like cold plunge tanks and stuff like that. And yeast release, the same as humans do, they release heat shock proteins.
Yeah, that was what I was
now maybe these heat shock proteins, and I don't know, I am theorizing off the bat here. I think maybe that those heat shock proteins are flavor positive, and maybe are, because I've noticed when I crash really hard really quick, I can have a reduction in hop flavor but also a reduction in overall flavor, and it might be that they're releasing these proteins, and these proteins are somehow subduing the flavors that they've released themselves. Maybe they're binding to the chemicals and causing them to drop out. I don't know. Maybe that could be a reason for it. I mean, it's a natural defense mechanism of the yeast. As the temperature drops and they go into stasis, which essentially they do, they have these proteins around them.
In layman's terms, the yeast are shitting themselves because the temperature's like dropping rapidly, right?
I mean, they're shitting anyway, but the essentially,
I mean,
yeah, totally.
Have you done it both ways and noticed any difference, Owen? Or
yeah, totally. But I noticed a massive difference with hop flavor and aroma when I cold crash slower.
Yeah.
But I also noticed telomere lengthening make beer younger. Oh, fucking hell. Yeah, we'll go into that later. But I noticed that the flavor was more pronounced and it was almost crisper. But at the same time, I also noticed that the head retention was greater. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think all of that is due to these proteins that are being released by the yeast when they're going into stasis.
What are your thoughts, Owen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've only really sort of heard on the grapevine that this kind of don't crash more than 3 degrees in any given period of time. It's like 4 degrees in 24 hours or something like that. Kind of apparently helps with head retention. If you've got the patience for it,
There is some science behind that.
Yeah, there probably is.
Do you want me to read it?
For me, like, just not sure I could be fucking bothered.
It's only a paragraph.
Yeah, do it.
Okay, so essentially this is to do with head retention and protein. So stick with me. High protein level. So beers with a high protein content, especially those made with wheat, tend to have finer, more stable bubbles. Proteins, particularly a protein called lipid transfer protein 1, plays a very crucial role in stabilizing foam and creating smaller bubbles. LPT1 is hydrophobic, so it's scared of water, so it actively repels water. And it forms a protective layer around the bubbles, increasing stability and longevity of the bubbles. I think that those proteins are also responsible for keeping the yeast calm, because I believe that those proteins are the same ones that are released during the drop in temperature, and they're essentially the same as the thermal shock proteins. Or they're very similar. If they're not the same, they're probably very similar. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that a no?
I felt like
What was the
might have
question?
been a little bit of contradiction in there when you kind of said, so we think that these kind of thermal shock proteins are the thing that's helping to maintain head retention.
Yes, they are.
But they would only occur when we drop the temperature really quickly.
No, because thermal shock occurs during a gradual decrease at the same time. The expression of the protein, so the rate at which they're expressed would differ.
Okay. So if we dropped it hard and fast, it may just not produce as much.
Exactly.
And whereas if we do it gradually, it might.
I'm literally theorizing off the top of my head.
That's all right. We've had a few beers, and why not?
That's essentially what I'm thinking. But anyway,
that might be warranting some more research and maybe
a lot more research.
One to look back on, but
and
otherwise an interesting discussion nonetheless.
To be fair, it's easier to soft crash or slow crash, whatever you want to call it, if you have the ability to program. You can program, I'm pretty sure the Wi-Fi ink birds can be programmed, but also craft beer pie can be programmed to drop by a specific temperature over a specific time period.
And the rat temp controller, you can do
Yep,
the same.
you can do that as well, yes.
Yeah.
So that may be something that's worth looking into. Other than that, we've got one more thing to cover before we move. Fucking flies pissing me off. Sorry. It's like buzzing in front of me. It's doing my nutting. There's only one more thing to cover before we move to an after party. Tricky's fucked off. Owen, the very last bit on the notes. Do you want to do it?
Yeah. So we were just posing a question about some of the new dried yeasts that we've seen producing fairly large Krausens. I know that having used Haze Heaven, which is the new WHC yeast, which by all accounts is dried London fog, is very lively. Saturated, I've also found is very lively. although that's not particularly new. That's been around for a little while. So different variants of London Ale 3 essentially. And there was a question just around whether second generation, you see if this reduces over time. I can probably tell you partly the answer to that because I made a beer last weekend and pitched the beer onto the yeast cake of the previous beer, which was Haze Heaven. Although I will add that I also added a fresh pack of dried yeast as well, just for insurance purposes. I did drop some of the hops and the yeast off the previous yeast cake, or the trub, whatever, big mix of everything. And interestingly, like the Krausen, I didn't have a lot of pressure on it. The Krausen behaved itself for probably the first 2 or 3 days, maybe even 4 days, and then all of a sudden, after that, it just kicked up and made a mess of my bloody firm fridge again. So it's kind of weird. Like normally you expect the Krausen to sort of jump up quite quickly over the first day or two, and weirdly it's sort of appearing like much later. I'm not really sure why, but anyway, point of discussion.
It's a weird one, isn't it? First generation seems to be super hardcore. I've not really used any yeast second generation for a very long time to see if that reduces. I pretty much dry hop most things, so it's been quite difficult for me to do that without any kind of flavour carryover or stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It for anybody who reuses their yeast, maybe this is time for you to chirp in and sort of let us know. You know, if you use something first generation, have you noticed a massive Krausen, and then second
I haven't done it
generation
a huge amount from like beer to beer, but I have noticed that sort of similar experience occasionally with starters, where you'd be like reusing an overbuilt starter or something like that, and then you repitch it into another starter, and then suddenly it's like fucking exploding out of the top of like a volcano, even though the last one was just pretty
nice
tame.
and chilled. Yeah.
So yeah, there's something in that. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely like, almost like you can't consistently expect the same behavior from it generation to generation. That's I've got nothing else to add to that conversation other than that I've definitely seen similar things in starters as opposed to like beer to beer from repitching yeast into the fermenter or pitching onto the yeast cake or whatever it might be.
It's a strange one, but it is a point of discussion. So I think
Thomas has likened it to the Return of the Jedi.
he has, definitely, yeah, he has. I think at this point we need to call a halt to this because we are currently circling around, discussing things over and over. Let's knock this one on the head and let's jump into an after party where we can have a proper discussion in an unfiltered environment. So, first time
we can talk about recent dried yeast releases.
Yeah,
and
we'll
like
talk about that one in the after
Yeah,
party.
we can chat about train types as well.
Let's not do that. So, guys, one thing I will say is I'm going to hand over to Tricky and give him the joy of saying what needs to be said.
So, that's episode 115 in the bag, and thank you for joining us for discussing all things yeast related on this episode. If you fancy watching this, if you're watching this live and you fancy jumping into the after party, go and find the link in the chat, which will be on there shortly, courtesy of Chris. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next episode. Make sure you go and check out the Malt Miller in the meantime, our proud sponsors and suppliers of all things yeast related, including nutrients and various other things that we might have talked about today. So go and check them out, and thanks for joining us, thanks for listening. As always, we appreciate it, and thanks very much to all of the patrons and supporters of the podcast. We will see you all soon. Say goodbye, guys.
Adios.
Bye. Have you clicked the end stream bit, Tricky, yet?
I have now.